I don't pretend to deep psychoanalysis. I'm a writer. That's why I understand that creativity is based on a traumatic situation which the author himself sometimes doesn't fully realize, but indeed tries to overcome. Classical psychoanalysis claims that this is a common birth trauma, original sin, but this can be argued since we all once came into the world through pain and blood, but not everyone devoted himself to creativity. Obviously, some traumas of conscious age overlap the trauma of birth. Psychoanalysis suggests that human behavior is largely determined by unconscious impulses, which include desires, experiences, often so forbidden and terrible that a person cannot admit to himself, and which he either doesn't allow to consciousness or, as it were, forgets. Nevertheless, they stick out like an orb from the back in dreams, creativity, neurotic disorders, fantasies, reservation, and so on. Freud saw the origins of art in fantasies when sons, having abandoned the idea of replacing their father in real life, put themselves in his place in their imagination, trying to satisfy their unconscious desires. According to Freud, art displaces socially unacceptable impulses from a person's consciousness, maintaining mental balance. That is, it acts as a kind of therapy. The detailed biography of iurlionis seems to prompt some conclusions from the field of not even psychoanalysis but psychiatry. Everyone is well aware that one of the very first paintings of iurlionis, Silence or Peace, created in 1904, is cited in Russian textbooks as of psychiatry as an example of the work of a mentally ill person. Here is what the Soviet psychiatrist Gyvybe writes. The features of the schizophrenic psyche can be seen in the paintings of the artist iurlionis, who suffered from schizophrenia and reflected in his works a lot of disease. Did iurlionis suffer from schizophrenia? Modern psychiatrists find it difficult to pinpoint the diagnosis of the artist. It is known that during the period of psychotic states, he was in a state of ecstasy when the whole world was filled with wonderful music arising from nowhere. The music of the spheres, which visited not only iurlionis, for example, Nikolai Gogol wrote, invisible, sweet-voiced music has penetrated the whole world, spilled over and breathes in 1,000 different images. Gogol was also a mentally unstable person, but his revelation isn't evidence of a mental disorder, but of an ordinary creative breakthrough, active transcending, although in psychiatry textbooks the music of the spheres is called a musical hallucination. In this context, cases of synesthesia are very interesting. For iurlionis, the sensation of melodic sounds was accompanied by some kind of color experiences. So the expression symphony of colors is not only figurative. Iurlionis captured the sound images of heavenly music in his famous sonata cycles. And who can say with complete certainty that hallucinatory experiences are not genuine if they make a much greater emotional expression on us than real objects, or those that ordinary consciousness considers real? In everyday consciousness, the concept of impossible is equal to delirium and hallucinations. Faced with something unusual falling out of the everyday world, a person exclaims, "Yes, this is complete nonsense," not wanting to go beyond the habitable, comfortable and safe routine. There is such a place in the novel written by Bulgakov, the novel The Master and Margarita, when Warland asks the Master if he believes that a devil is really in front of him. The answer is, you have to believe, but of course it would be much calmer to consider you the fruit of hallucination. In general, now, excerpts from Bulgakov's famous novel are perceived almost a commonplace, but in times of deep stagnation, some readers, after reading 3 pages, discarded the book as if it burned their fingers. Satan in Moscow, what nonsense! However, we digress. The childhood facts described in the artist's biography provide us little ground for psychoanalysis. It is known that Mikalojus Čiurlionis inherited his passion for music from his father, and he also inherited oddities of character from him. So he rather repeated the manner of his parental behavior than opposite it. The father, a rural organist, didn't drink, didn't rage, didn't scoff at the children, but he liked to wander aimlessly in the forest all alone for several days. And only the possible condemnation of neighbors made him sometimes bring home game birds. One day, the father, having sought the plot of the forest that belonged to him, went on a trip just like that, to look at the world, leaving his wife with a 3-year-old child, and returned only a year later. In modern psychology, his behavior is called teenage or infantile. How it was regarded at the end of the 19th century is difficult to say, but it was clearly not encouraged. How did little Mikalojus survive the absence of his father? Was he confused? Or having not received an answer to his question, reconciled with the situation of the absence of a parent? Or did the object of envy and jealousy disappear for him at that moment, which in classical psychoanalysis is the figure of the father? In general, not facts of the biography tell more about the life of any artist, but the works themselves, or the text that says even more about the author than the author himself wanted to say. The text betrays the author, reveals things drowned in the unconscious. Let's take one of the sunniest and happiest painting of Čiurlionis, Paradise, created in 1909, obviously against the backdrop of happy change in life. That year Čiurlionis married Sofia Kymantai. And now, in his paradise, light butterfly-like entities flutter over a meadow through with flowers at the foot of a gigantic staircase to heaven. There is not a hint of tragedy in the picture, which, however, is natural in paradise, as well as no schizophrenic notes in our opinion. However, in this paradise there is not even a hint of the presence of God. And this is not the general experience of God forsakenness that struck the European artistic world after Nietzsche's well-known statement. The sunny world of Iurlionis is completely self-sufficient in its happiness. The artist doesn't even remember the Heavenly Father. His paradise unfolds in the space of personal existence. There is still a source of light in paradise. Angels cast shadows, but the source itself is beyond our perception. We can only guess what exists. That is, God the Father in paradise still didn't die. He is, but somewhere, very far away, and doesn't interfere with anyone. In the same 1909, the painting Angel was created. Bridges and arched passages leading to the world of eternal rest are painted in red tones, rare for Iurlionis. This isn't only a spectacle of the decline of human life, but the decline of the old European civilization, and the figures of people making the transition are literally indicated by strokes and not personified. The image of a tired angel sitting on a rock expresses complete indifference to the fate of wandering souls. People are only the backdrop of the mystery actions. According to the words of Alexander Blok, Iurlionis had the gift of divine visions, which clearly obscured the reality of the dance plan. Whereas in poetry the tradition of Russian symbolism gave rise to a rich hysterical discourse, Iurlionis is deliberately restrained. Thus, Andrei Bely, in the collection Gold in Azure, has everything exactly painted in the indicated colors. Brusov is multicolored. Even Blok actively uses color painting. There are yellow windows in the neighboring house. You sadly wrapped yourself in a blue cloak. A black man ran around the city. This is the wind with a red flag, and so on. In addition, Blok often cries. A child who was involved in secret cried. A drunken poet has tears, a drunken prostitute has laughter. Cry, heart, cry. Why did hysteria actualize at the turn of the century? Probably because its goal was to facilitate the transition from one type of cultural mentality associated with the domestic 19th century to the unpredictable and frightening 20th century. But what exactly did the hysterical poetics of the Silver Age supplant? After all, the hysterical reaction is intended to repress some kind of psychic trauma, as Freud argued at the end of the 19th century. What did the new 20th century bring with it? Why was it necessary to push something out? It is traditionally believed that this is the disappearance of matter based on the discovery of the electron, the dualistic nature of light, as well the invention of cinema, psychoanalysis, and the theory of relativity. Cinema showed the fragility of the border between reality and fantasy. Psychoanalysis shocked the public with the fact that behind external mental reaction is showed deep and very indecent unconscious manifestations. The theory of relativity proved the finiteness of the propagation of light signal and thereby rejected the Newtonian postulate of the unviolability of the boundary between time and space. However, the disappearance of matter hardly explains why historical discourse became the universal cultural code of Silver Age art. Let us turn to the book written by Smirnov, Psychodiachronology, the psychohistory of Russian literature from Romanticism to the present day. This is exactly what the author called the chapter devoted to the beginning of the 20th century, symbolism or hysteria. Smirnov sees the main feature of symbolic hysteria and the idea of pancoherence, or the interweaving on the meaning of the world where everything is connected with everything. Iurlionis at first glance falls out of the general hysteria. He doesn't cry. His paintings show anxiety but not crying. Sometimes incomprehensible is happening in his world. Everything takes on new multiple meanings, or according to Jaspers, some change occurs, due to which everything is shrouded in a faint but all-pervading, indefinite, terrifying glow. It is this glow that the eyes of a monster radiate, pretending to be an island in the middle of a calm sea. Iurlionis is practically achromatic. Bright colors appear only in his early works. In Symphony of the Funeral, oddly enough, there is a bright blue coffin against the background of the dozen rays of the sun. Even the Sonata of the Sun shines with a subdued light, although it's difficult to talk about the color of Iurlionis because of poor preservation of works. But the same hidden horror of being, especially in the later works of Iurlionis, isn't it the fear of death, the main fear of the era? This was unequivocally stated precisely in the final of the Sonata of the Sun, where the mystery of the heat death of the universe is played out on a theater stage covered with cobwebs. The figure created in 1908 is indicative. Anxiety caused by a traumatic event is subsequently regulated by persistent repetition of the original situation. Each repetition serves to reduce the anxiety associated with the situation. So in the classic one-duck fugue, there are several voices and each voice repeats a given theme. The fugue slows down time, the terrible entropy time of reality, the time of decay and house. In an ordinary, non-pathological consciousness, the experience of entropic time is still painful. After all, any life ends in death. But a person tries to turn back time towards the exhaustion of entropy by his works, the meaning of which is to perpetuate his personality or to give the passage of time some kind of meaningfulness. This is how the religious consciousness acts. Symbolism generally makes the boundaries between the norm and pathology, between the external and the internal, the secret and the manifest, unsteady. Symbolism in many ways fills works of art with their true, deeply spiritual and beautiful meaning and content. Iurlionis' painting is a continuous stream of allegories that the artist invites us to read. The environment is perceived by him not mechanically, like photographing, but is a known system of connections, determined both by the characteristics of the personality to a certain extent autistic, self-dependent, and by all previous experience and by the situation that has developed immediately at the moment of perception. The paintings of Čiurlionis are filled with multiple meanings, and it can be assumed that these meanings change over time. Only the peace and loneliness of the artist is constant. Čiurlionis have no portraits as such. Human figures are either stuffed or symbolize themselves the idea of a person in general. The figures of the people crossing the bridge in the painting and angel are atomic, each on its own, including the extremely lonely angel on top of the rock. The child in the painting Fairy Tale 2, created in 1909, is also extremely lonely. Although Čiurlionis grew up in a large family with 9 children, but there is a peace and loneliness of the soul which has most likely revealed to Čiurlionis in his early years, when he was among people close to him. Since the family lived in the resort town of Druskininkai, summer residents from Warsaw and St. Petersburg enjoyed listening to the play of the little child prodigy. Naturally, his parents were proud of him, but what did the little musician himself experience at such moments? Was the world outside the family kind to him? Already in his youthful diaries he wrote, "I will not be happy, it cannot be otherwise. I am too easily hurt. I take everything too close to my heart. I don't like strangers and I am afraid of them. I don't know how to live among them." People of Čiurlionis are sexless, practically asexual. They are not personified. They are like plants that grew among multiple phallic symbols in the form of towers directed to the very clouds. These phallic symbols are so obvious that you don't even want to focus on them. In the art of modernism, gender, despite the manifesto of bisexuality, is still determined with a high degree of probability, except perhaps for Munch's Scream. The artist claimed that he depicted the cry of nature itself, which he once caught walking in the fjords, and it could be the same existential horror poured into the air as a premonition to the close upheavals of the 20th century. And the same clairaudience manifested by Čiurlionis in the form of symphonic poems. He heard the bright words from early youth, but now the colors thicken, metaphysical darkness breaks out from the backyard of being, and the demon, resembling a huge nocturnal insect, opens its black wings. The demon breaks out of the darkness of the unconscious. Contemporaries noted that since 1901, when only 10 years remained before the end of Čiurlionis' short life, he began to change dramatically. Almost every 2 subsequent years, Čiurlionis is different. In 1904, according to the memoirs of actress Brilkina, an acquaintance of Čiurlionis, it can be concluded that Čiurlionis was already suffering from mental disorders and was aware of this. In general, illusions and hallucinations in psychiatry serve as clear evidence of pathology. An illusion is when real objects or phenomena are preserved in a perverted form, for example, when voices or whole conversations are heard in the noise of rain, when spots on the wall, the wallpaper patterns seem to take on the shape of some figures. Perhaps all of us were engaged in the search for the pictures on wallpaper or carpet in childhood. Some are still doing this not because of the pathology of perception, but only because they have not splashed their children's interest in the world around them. Naturally, this pathology is easy to meet in persons with a strong imagination. Against the background of created giftedness, the picture of psychosis unfolds more fully and vividly than the presence of only a limited intellect. In the book Psychology of Schizophrenia, Kempinski writes the following words about this. The main feature of schizophrenic cosmology is fantasy and magic. The schizophrenic world is filled by mysterious energies, rays, good and evil forces, waves penetrating human thoughts and controlling human behavior. In the perception of a schizophrenic patient, everything is filled with divine or devilish substance. Matter becomes spirit. Fluids, telepathic waves emanate from a person. A literal illustration of what has been said could serve as a picture of iurlionis thought. It was painted in the same 1904 as a piece. It can be assumed that iurlionis' mental disorder consisted in the ability to look into the depths of his soul. It was revealed to him that due to cowardice and weakness of character, ordinary people hid, avoiding even the slightest approach to the very possibility of self-comprehension. Freud, on the other hand, considered all creativity as a continuation of a child's game in which the artist creates his own world, taking it extremely seriously, but sharply separating it from reality. At the same time, it is by no means a happy person who creates, but an unsatisfied one. The artist is overwhelmed by strong feelings under the influence of unresolved internal conflicts, from which he needs to free himself. If the unconscious of the artist didn't find realization in artistic fantasy, then the energy of the unconscious would be spent on creating neurosis. Successful psychoanalysis certainly removes the intensity of a person's passions, makes his psyche healthy, but is it necessary to treat an artist? Isn't it better to leave everything as it is, so as not to deprive him of an incentive for creativity, suppressing the fire of conflicts in his soul, which he melts into art?